Jai. Gaur Premanande. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Salataya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Ajunulambita Bhujo Kanakavadato Sankirtanaika Pitaro Kamalaya Taksho Vishwambaro Dvijabaro Yugadharma Palo Vande Jagat Priya Guru Karunavotaro Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityanando Sahodito Gauradai Pushpavanto Chidro Sando Namo Vandeham Shri Ramakrishna Abhaya Charana Sakho Sukado Paramanando Sundaro Subhapriyo He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Taptam Chandamurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Shri Gauri Vaishnava Guru Parampara ki Jai, Shri Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki Jai, Bhakti Vaksakshidhar Dev Goswami Maharaj ki Jai, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada ki Jai, Shri Bhakti Vinod Parivar ki Jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki Jai, Gaur Premanande. Good evening everyone, welcome ladies. So, we continue our discussion tonight, briefly, from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Sri Krishna's Kaviraj Goswami Mahashaya ki Jai. We're reading from the 13th chapter of the Adi Leela. This is where the narrative of the Leela actually begins. So it's quite a build-up to this point, quite a philosophical and theological build-up, largely through the medium of the Mangalacharan of Krishnadas Kaviraj, which is a peculiar invocation in that typically, he describes this himself, a Mangalacharan consists of three elements. A namaskar verse, a verse where the deities of the book are venerated and respected, the deities presiding over the text. A verse that Vastunudesh verse, a verse that describes the tattva, the underlying philosophy of the book in essence, in a kind of a condensed, cryptic form, and then Ashirvad verse, a verse that offers benediction to the readers. So the Mangalcharan is complete, as he describes it, in these three verses, but he employs two verses for his Namaskar verse, and one for the Ashirvad verse and one for the Vastunudesh verse, but his entire Mangalacharan consists of 14 verses, so it's rather peculiar and rather extended, if you will, and he has his own auto-commentary on it that is also significant. So, at the onset, the point is of the theology that underlies the narrative of the life of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, an extraordinary person, historical person, of course, and an ahistorical person as well, from a theological and philosophical point of view, and from the spiritual, experiential point of view of the many, many people, devotees, educated people, artisans, who witnessed the person and history of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and described it as they have in books like this, Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is kind of the last of a series of narratives describing his life and teachings. This is the most complete of all of those texts, the Chaitanya Charitamrita. It comes at the end after a number of other hagiographical or biographical works, and so he had the wealth of those to draw upon, and he also had the coming like a generation after the presence of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He had the wealth of the Goswamis, the founding acharyas of the Sampradaya, who formed the Sampradaya. They're the founders, and their texts, their books, are the scriptural books for the next 10,000 years or something like that. That's what they are. And so he had the wealth of those, the writings of Rup Sanatan, Raghunath Das, Jiva Goswami, and so forth to draw upon. And so while he describes the narrative and defers to others, such as particularly Vrindavan Das Thakur, who wrote Chaitanya Bhagavat, as someone whose work was being relished at the time of the Goswamis, they were reading about the life of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu through the book of Vrindavan Das, Chaitanya Bhagavat. But as he explains earlier here in the text in chapter 8, that he was requested to write something about the later Leelas of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in particular. The Leelas after he took sannyas in Jagannath Puri. And so he did so, deferring to Vrindavan Das and his Chaitanya Bhagavat, and drawing upon the works of Murari Gupta, the notes of Raghunath Das and Sarup Damodar, that are the literary foundation of the whole lineage, and faithfully represented in the text, in the philosophical sections, and within the Leela narrative sections as well. I mean, this book, I was a fortunate person to be one of the first people in the Western world to ever read the Chaitanya Charitamrita. It came out in the early, mid-70s, I guess, early 70s. And, there's a story behind that. Comes to mind, worth relating. Many of you have heard it, of course, but I was on a walk with Prabhupada one morning, and it happened to be in Los Angeles, and along the beach, Venice Beach, where he liked to walk, and he had mentioned that in his writing, which he saw himself principally as an author, and then he had a mission an organization that was formed to distribute and assimilate and practice that which was written in the texts. So kind of the organization, if you will, was supposed to flow out of the teachings of the book. It was supposed to correspond with the book. The example of the devotees was supposed to correspond with the text and so forth. So at any rate, he was really showering his disciples with knowledge, which is really the business of the guru. In this case, the knowledge of bhakti. And the example is that at one point we were receiving like a 300-400 page book every month. That's a big book, and it had all kinds of wild things in it in comparison to our experience. People with 4 heads and 6 arms, and this whole Bhagavatam narrative that he was bringing out. So it was quite occupying for us. We were ready to turn left, right, sit up, stand on our heads. We were like, he had us in a very flexible, if you will, space. Here we were getting these insights, like I say, a 400-page book a month. To keep up with that was considerable, in light of the fact that, of course, it was an ancient text, and it was philosophical, and it wasn't like a novel, and so many philosophical insights and stories within stories, the way the Bhagavatam works as a question, and then the answer answers by telling a story, and in the context of that story, there's another story, and finally you find the answer, and you're back to the beginning, and the question and answers continue, and so forth. So it's a complex book, an interesting and consuming book, the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam is the very heart of the tradition of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It's thought to be the hub around which all of the sacred texts of the Hindus orbit. In other words, they will all be understood in context with reference to the Bhagavad, which is thought to be like the cream, if you will, of the milk of the Veda and the Upanishads. Shruti saram ekam, it describes itself. Shruti means the Veda, and Shruti saram ekam, sar means cream, and it means essence. It's the cream, essence of the Shruti. A very extraordinary work. Besides our theological and philosophical perspective on it, in terms of its place in within the body of the sacred texts, just from a practical point of view, its language, the theological complexity of the text, and so forth, separates it entirely. It's like a man amongst boys or something like that, in relation to the other Puranas. It's one of the Puranas. It's in a Puranic setting. It has the various ingredients of a Purana, with the description of the Vamsas and the character of the Vamsa, the avatars. There are certain 5-6 elements that make a Purana. So it has these things in place to make it Puranic in its genre, but its message transcends anything that you can find in the other Puranas and so on and so forth. So it's amongst the Puranas. You'll find over 80 Sanskrit commentaries on the Bhagavatam. That means Sanskrit is a learned language of the Hindu scholars and so forth, of times gone by for the most part, although there are some today as well. That they took the time to write a commentary on that in Sanskrit means that it was really a book of the intelligentsia of the time, and this over centuries. And the literary sophistication of the book, the nature of the Sanskrit and so forth, separates it, as I say. The fact that it attracted the attention of scholars and of the ruling class as well. If you look in India, you will see this miniature art. It was something that's still preserved today. In fact, the cover of my book, Aesthetic Vedanta, and the Bhagavad Gita were drawn by a person, Mahavir Swami, who I found in Rajasthan, who's preserving this art of miniature art. I mean, he draws with a magnifying glass, and a hair from the tail of the squirrel. And all of the paints are made from natural ingredients, like the yellow comes from cow urine and dried in the sun and so forth. And it says, so, at any rate, this was an art, a few hundred years ago, 500 years ago, that was a form of art that was prominent. And you find many, many depictions of the Leelas, the play, the divine play of Krishna in the Bhagavatam, in this form of miniature art. And many of them are signed, as sometimes painters do, sign their painting in Arabic. It means the Muslims were drawing pictures of Krishna Leela. That the charm, in other words, of the Bhagavatam, the charm of the person of Krishna, despite the religious divide between Hinduism and the Islamic faith, it couldn't be avoided. Krishna this is a beautiful thing about the Krishna notion of the Godhead, because in the person of Krishna, in the narratives, you find a description of the Godhead that human beings can connect with emotionally in terms of the whole entire range of human emotions. I'll give you an example of what I mean. If you take Christianity, you find the Christ, and he's God, thought to be in human form, the Son of God, miraculous person, divine, human, divine and human. This is the whole. This is what life's about, really, in one sense. Are we divine or are we human? Are we animal or are we, human? Or if we're human, we're one of the animals. Human life is like the most complex form of life, where abstract thought becomes prominent and the question why surfaces. Not how to eat, how to sleep, how to make, how to defend, but the very troubling question, why? Why am I? What is meaningful? How can I have purpose? These things have nothing to do with matter. Purpose, meaning, value, has nothing to do with inert matter. It has everything to do with the subjective realm, with consciousness proper. So the idea is that consciousness in human life is coming to the fore, and it's asking about itself. It's asking questions that material nature, that matter can't answer. It's asking about, why am I? What is the meaning? Not how to do this or that, but what is the purpose? In an overarching sense of life. So it can answer that question. It can answer matter, nature points us in the direction of her source. And a prominent manifestation of that answer that human life constitutes, we are a question, in a sense, the answer, a prominent manifestation that is the sacred texts of the Hindus. The answer, Om, it's an affirmation. It begins with this, yes, you have meaning. And then many verses describe what is the meaning, what is the purpose, and so forth, how to realize it, and so on. So, anyway, many thoughts, but so...
You will get in a volume of the Bhagavatam every month.
Yeah, we'll get into that, right. So, the Bhagavatam, one of those sacred texts, and the center, from our perspective, and for good reason. For Jiva Goswami gives a very good argument for that. But besides his argument, as I'm saying, from a literary, artistic point of view, from poetic point of view, the Krishna concept, sense, whether that's good or bad. So we say that the Bhagavatam and the Krishna conception of Godhead is that it enables us to touch, to bond with the Godhead, with the whole range of human emotions. I gave an example of Christianity. Jesus is there, and he dies on the cross. And so it touches certain human emotions like, oh my God, like guilt. He did that for us. Mel Gibson, who has a place nearby here, did a movie about Jesus some years back. And it was famous. I didn't go to see it, but it was like real, like in 3D or something, or whatever it is, taking the cross up, and the prem is defined marginally by a characteristic of what we call. But still we go, but still Krishna can capture us. We can find the Leelas charming because they so much. We can bond, we can relate, we can connect with him. So the Bhagavatam depicts these Leelas most beautifully and showcases the possibility of relationship with Krishna. There are three basic rasic centers to the Bhagavatam. We have a Vatsalya center, consisting of the Damodar Leela chapters. You have a Sakyarasa center, consisting of the Brahma Vimohan Leela. There's 3-4 chapters there, and the Dinakasura Leela. And then you have, of course, the Rasa Leela, the 5 chapters that showcase the Madhurya Rasa. Bhagavatam is showcasing. These are all forms of service. So the Bhagavatam, like none of the other texts, even the Vishnu Purana, for example, or Padma Purana, where Leelas are from. But tonight, but we're at the end of this chapter here, chapter 13. We heard Sita Thakurani's about her coming and giving. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has been born. Sita has come and brought golden ornaments and silks and spices and so many things. Several verses about her tending to the child and celebrating his birth. The idea behind all the wealth that she gave is that it represents Lakshmi and Yogamaya. So Lakshmi is wealthy. Advaita, her husband, is Mahavishnu. Typically Brahmins were poor. Typically Vaishnavas were poor. In the Bhagavatam, the question is asked by Yudhisthira that Narayan is very opulent and wealthy, And Shiva's very poor, dressing in, well, he's got the bank account, he's got the checkbook. So please resolve this contradiction, was the question of Yudhisthira to Narada. And Narada explained it's true, actually. Shiva's Asutoshi is very easily pleased. So people ask him for things, he gives them. He has the power to give them. Why does he have the power to give them? He has nothing. He dresses in ashes. He lives on a rock. Where does he have the power to give things to people? The idea is that knowledge exceeds things. The best thing, not things. Ordinary material. And he, unlike Shiva, doesn't respond to inspiration other than do the bidding of his guru. So typically, devotees are poor. That's why Advaita is exceptional. He's a devotee, but he was wealthy. He was the leader in Nadi at the time of all the devotees, and his house was a preaching center. They would read the Bhagavatam, discuss it from a devotional perspective, and the Gita, and chant, and so on. He had no sorrows, except the sorrow he felt for others who didn't take to bhakti. His wife, he is Mahavishnu. Mahavishnu is the compassion of Narayan. Narayan wants to bestow mukti. But who can he bestow mukti on in Vaikuntha? Everybody's already got it. So there needs to be another world. So this world is manifest for the purpose of Narayan experiencing compassion. And he does so in the form of Mahavishnu, who becomes many, the one becomes many. And although the intention is good, material nature is powerful and they're small. So in relation to the power of material energy, the small jivas, the sparks of the fire of Mahavishnu, tend to fall into the clouds of smoke. And the fact that their spark is obscured, so he avatars, he descends into the world, manifests the Veda, and so on and so forth. This is all the compassion of Narayan. So Advaita is thought in Gaur Lila to be an incarnation of Mahavishnu. So Lakshmi is there with him as Sita Devi. So she's depicted as coming to the child. And unlike others who have come, she's giving gold and valuable things and so forth, saying that she's very wealthy. She's the goddess of fortune. I ended my talk last night about her by way of speaking about the internal energy of Krishna that Lakshmi, Radha, and so forth. They represent really the wealth of Goloka because it's loving to be instead of being to love.